Nancy, a 27-year-old successful event planner, is humiliated when her mother seats her at a children's table during a family dinner because she's unmarried. After enduring years of subtle dismissal, Nancy walks out, retreats into work and friendship support, and sets firm boundaries. Her decision fractures family ties but leads to professional triumph, a high-profile wedding and big contracts, and personal liberation. She chooses self-respect over conditional family acceptance. Beginning, elegant family dinner at Celestine's. Warm setting, Nancy introduced as competent and independent, then the shock, she's directed to the children's table. Conflict, accumulated emotional injuries surface, Nancy confronts the humiliation internally and then physically leaves. Family reacts with guilt trips, calls, and attempts to regain control. Climax, Nancy refuses to apologize or return. She cuts contact, parents threaten exclusion. The crisis peaks when her parents show up at her door and she declares boundaries. End/resolution, Nancy builds a thriving business, gains validation through the Thornton wedding success and major clients, finds surrogate family in friends and allies, and accepts the cost of estrangement as the price of self-respect. The public humiliation at a chic restaurant, vivid, instantly sympathetic. The children's menu and plastic cups juxtaposed with leather-bound menus, a strong visual symbol. The phone buzzing with escalating missed calls and texts, palpable tension. The decision to walk out and the subsequent turning off of the phone, turning point of agency. Aunt Helen's supportive message, a quiet ally validating Nancy's perspective. The Thornton wedding success and the cascade of professional validation, catharsis and payoff. The parents arriving at Nancy's door and the calm, firm boundary setting, emotional confrontation. Final acceptance and friendsgiving, intimacy, warmth, and reclaimed joy. Family dynamics and conditional approval are universally resonant. Many viewers will identify with the not-celebrated child. The single versus married social expectation tug, timely and shareable in social media culture. Strong, visual contrasts, kids' menu versus leather-bound menus, children's table versus head table. Mixture of humiliation plus triumphant rebound, revenge via success, is emotionally shareable and satisfying. Clear protagonist arc, underdog boundary thriving, ideal for short films, reels, and shareable captions. Text/phone sequences and timing make it easy to adapt into short clips, captioned videos, and TikTok/Instagram microscenes. Some moments tread familiar territory. Successful single protagonist humiliated by traditional family is a known trope. Repetition in the script. Many scenes emphasize the same call/text barrage, sometimes slowing pacing. A few characters, father, siblings, stay relatively two-dimensional, mainly vehicles for conflict rather than fully rounded people. The career vindication equals emotional resolution arc risks simplifying grief. Professional success doesn't fully resolve family wounds, but the script sometimes treats it as complete closure. The resolution leans toward tidy payoff. Some readers/viewers might expect a more complex reconciliation path or deeper exploration of Nancy's interior healing. Tone and focus. Tighten pacing early, shorten repetitive call/text beats and use one or two representative bursts with cinematic timing, visual notifications overlay, close-ups. Character depth. Give subtle moments that humanize at least one family member, e.g., a private microgesture from Daniel or Mother that hints at their own insecurities. Avoid painting all family as purely antagonistic. Show, don't tell. Replace interior monologue blocks with visual, sensory details. Nancy's hands on the plastic cup, condensation on crystal at the adult table, sound design of laughter. Raise the stakes emotionally. Add a consequential choice beyond walking out, e.g., Nancy must decide whether to sign a client whose family is tied to her parents, or whether to accept an award that would require reconciling publicly. Complicate success. Let professional triumph create its own complications, jealous clients, moral choices, so the victory feels earned and nuanced. Ambiguous ending option. Consider leaving room for slow reconciliation rather than total estrangement. An open-ended final scene, a card, an unreturned voicemail, a quiet nod across an event, can feel richer. Millennial/Gen Z women, 20s to 40s, who value career autonomy and boundary setting. Viewers who enjoy short, emotionally resonant drama and slow-burn revenge via empowerment. Audiences on TikTok/Instagram/YouTube Shorts who follow family conflict, emotional justice stories, and workplace triumph reels. Fans of relationship-driven indie shorts and female-led character pieces. The restaurant looked like a photograph, low light folding into amber, a pianist's single note drifting through the room. Nancy stood at the doorway with her coat over one arm and the echo of her mother's laugh still in her head. She had chosen the dress like a result, tailored, not flashy, the kind of thing people noticed only because everything else around it had been arranged with intention. Tonight was supposed to be a family celebration. Tonight she would be seen. Instead, the hostess guided her past linen and candlelight to a corner where plastic chairs waited like a bad joke. The cluster of tiny people at the table looked up, an 8-year-old with a tablet, a 6-year-old with sticky bangs, bright plastic cups with superheroes. Nancy's name landed like a dropped coin. Nancy, sweetie, you'll be sitting over there with the little ones tonight. Her mother's voice was light, charitable, the sort of voice that erases agency. Nancy's breath tightened. The room reframed itself. Crystal glasses became trophies on a pedestal she was not invited to touch. At the head table, Daniel held court, an easy smile, the kind of laugh that draws other laughs. Courtney beside him leaned in, perfectly angled for approval. Her sister Bethany's voice chimed like a well-rehearsed instrument. Not one head turned toward the corner where Nancy stood. She moved as if in a shallow dream, slipping into a chair meant for smaller knees. The wooden slat pressed against her thighs, the tabletop was too close. Tyler, excited to be given a screen, grinned like she'd arrived in a parade made just for him. Sophia offered an earnest, "Are you sad, Aunt Nancy?" and Nancy forced an answer into the shape of adult composure. "I'm fine, love. Tell me about school." The menu in her hand was a glossy children's sheet, cartoon hot dogs, chicken fingers, mac and cheese in picture form. Across the room, leather-bound menus waited like a promise she wasn't supposed to read. A waiter knelt to present one to her with a practiced, patronizing smile, for the young lady. The smile slid off when Nancy met the eyes of those she'd grown up with, polite faces distracted by their own conversation. The air felt thinner than it should have, as if someone had put a glass dome over her. She remembered flashes, college diploma in hand while the reception drifted into conversation about Daniel's promotion, a phone call about a rented studio space answered with, "That's nice, dear. When are you going to settle down?" The memory didn't burn, it settled like sediment. Tonight folded old grain into new cuts. The phone vibrated, a message from Kelsey, a private bell that popped the bubble of humiliation. "How's the family dinner? Hope they're finally treating you like the boss you are." Nancy stared at the message, at the ridiculousness of it. The laugh waited in her throat and became a decision. She straightened. Not with theatricality, but with a small, sure recalibration of posture. She let Tyler's tablet fall quiet between thumbnail taps and stood. People might have assumed she'd stay, the dutiful, unassuming daughter, but she had once arranged entire weddings to go off without a hitch, learned to read tone and timing, to make rooms feel as she intended. The room tonight was arranged against her. She walked through the host of faces that meant comfort by instruction and discomfort by design. No one reached for her. No one rose. Inflamed by the absurdity, by the bitterness of a lifetime compressed into a single seating chart, she stepped into the restaurant's night air and breathed in rain-cooled Portland. It felt like the first clean thing she'd been allowed in years. She dialed Kelsey before she reached the car. "I'm out," she said. "Meet me at Bruno's in 20." She hung up and let the phone drop into her pocket, the device suddenly weightier with possibility than with obligation. Tonight, the story that would be told about her was not going to be written by anyone who sat her down as though she were invisible. Bruno's smelled of cinnamon and fellowship, low lights and a corner booth that had seen every frantic plan they'd devised for the past 5 years. Kelsey's face was the quick muscle of loyalty. She slid into the booth as if she'd been waiting for the exact moment Nancy needed a hand squeeze. Nancy told the story as if it were a simple report and felt each sentence land like a small brick. "They literally gave me mac and cheese," she said, trying for understated humor that wouldn't come. Kelsey's mouth fell open. Mauricio, the owner, set a bottle of wine between them with the kind of sympathy service that felt like a warm blanket. The first hour blurred between laughter and strategy. They catalogued the indignities, the wording, the sigh when Nancy spoke about the Thornton bid, the difference in the way Daniel's wins were cheered. Each anecdote landed like evidence. There was a pattern, small wounds repeated until they bled into identity. When Nancy's phone lit up, wave after wave of calls and texts, she watched the screen and felt the old reflex: answer, soothe, explain, and make it disappear. Each buzz was a tiny leash. She let them mount the table unread, face down like a small animal trapped by expectation. "You did the right thing," Kelsey said simply. "You left." It was not entirely a comfort, it was also an accusation of permission. Nancy let it be both. Kelsey's next question landed like a counselor's prompt. If you were advising a client, someone who came in exhausted from being dismissed by people who should love them, what would you tell them? Nancy had planned countless boundaries for brides and mothers who needed to keep their days sacred. She'd counseled couples on guest lists and on whose opinions mattered. On the screen between them she saw her own advice. "You deserve better," she said. Her own voice surprised her. "You don't apologize for protecting your dignity." They devised a plan that night that read more like a map than a rebellion. Step back, let the calls stack, prioritize work and allies, let the family feel the first portion of the cost. It wasn't vindictive. It was a reshaping of how she would spend her emotional capital. Aunt Helen's message arrived at midnight, quiet and sharp: "I saw what happened. You didn't deserve it. Call me if you want to talk." The text was a small island of validation. Nancy pressed a thumb over the screen and felt how little it took to change the narrative inside her head. The week that followed became productive precision. She sank into the Thornton file, where contracts were tidy and margins mattered. There she could control elements, linens, vendors, light plots. The world of events rewarded careful labor. In that domain, people paid attention. In that domain, she was accountable not to lineage but to results. Calls from home shrank in tone but grew in number. Each voicemail was a round of theater, guilt, rebuke, repentance, threat. Her mother oscillated between anger and hurt with the agility of someone practicing for an audience. "If you don't come to brunch, there will be consequences," one message warned, as if family privileges were conditional tokens they could rescind. Nancy watched herself in the glass of her office window, framed by the city, late autumn pale and relentless. She felt like a woman learning to place boundaries by experiment: try it, see what happens. She didn't want to be cruel, she wanted to be whole. Then Courtney arrived unannounced, the sort of knock that suggests curiosity and distaste in equal parts. The apology she offered, awkward, sincere, defensive, surprised Nancy. Courtney's acknowledgement that the seating had been wrong was small but destabilizing in a good way. It fractured the unanimity of the family story. If one voice could name the wrongness, maybe others could too. In the background, work kept electronic time, vendor calls, the bride's edits, and new request for 50 extra guests. Kelsey and Nancy recharted the timeline. Each added guest was one more knot of proof that Nancy's value could not be erased by a place setting. She built and commanded that proof with deft economy: emails, site visits, floral mock-ups. Every checkbox ticked was a small, accumulating vindication. Late one night, after a long call with a floral coordinator, Nancy stepped out onto the balcony of their office and looked at the river. The city lights folded into little constellations that belonged to no family. She breathed, and for the first time in months the breath went to the bottom of her lungs and stayed there. She was not about to become a cautionary tale for anyone else's comfort. The Thornton bride called with an addendum: 50 more guests, a late request for a fountain centerpiece, an extra band to close the night. It should have been a headache, instead it arrived like a dare, a moment where Nancy could make everything sing or watch it unravel. She accepted the challenge. For months the Thornton event staff became Nancy's ground. She negotiated, insisted, smoothed egos. Gregory Thornton, a father with the kind of business presence that fills a room without trying, observed her meticulousness like a patron impressed by craft. When the night arrived, the mansion slipped into magic under her direction. Candlelight pooled over silk, music unspooled just so, flowers fell like architecture. The bride walked in and cried, the groom wiped his face and laughed, the clean emotional reaction of a room made right. After the ceremony, as the reception hummed, people approached her, vendors offering future bookings, mothers asking for cards, curious guests who loved the detail. Nancy handed over cards until her fingers were roughed by paper. The validation was oral, detailed, immediate. It hit like applause not whispered but pronounced. Then the phone call came, Caroline Thornton's father, Gregory, wanting Nancy to pitch for corporate galas. He mentioned boards, charities, budgets that made her breath shift. The opportunity wasn't just more work, it was a kind of leverage she'd never had before. Contracts with cultural institutions and corporate backers would move her from boutique planner to a name Portland would trust. It was bigger than a wedding. But success refracted back into her life in ways that surprised her. Her mother's tone shifted from accusatory to tentative, and then to conciliatory. A truce was offered with strings attached, come back, apologize, and all would return to the old choreography. The offer stank of control masquerading as remorse. Nancy declined. She also felt a pull she hadn't noted before, the ache of history, the lonely ledger of birthdays and graduations that no amount of awards would fully wipe clean. Then Courtney's life began to fissure. News leaked through the grapevine that Daniel and Courtney's marriage was strained. Court's confession, an apology turned into a longer conversation, opened a new possibility. Some of the family were worse off under the old system. It wasn't a clean win. It made Nancy's choice more complicated. Aunt Helen's quiet presence continued, messages with small solidarity, a photograph of a foreign street, a ticket stub from a show she'd loved. Helen, unmarried and unconcerned with approval, provided not salvation but companionship in an alternate map to adulthood. When Helen said, "You did the right thing," it felt less like cheering and more like naming, a permission an elder gives that frees the younger from the need to explain. And then a twist that tasted like both validation and challenge. A prominent foundation invited Nancy to propose for their gala on short notice. The foundation's board included people connected to the city's social orbit, those who could change her company's trajectory. It would require her to present within a week, to build a concept different from weddings, institutional narratives, staged journeys, programming that would reflect civic culture rather than personal love. It was uncharted water. Kelsey rallied. Nights turned into mood board sprints, vendor phone blitzes, sample palettes at odd hours. Sophie, the assistant, became an essential force, juggling logistics and keeping the inbox from imploding. Nancy found herself enjoying the pressure. It was precise, it required imagination and grit, the identical muscles she used when she refused to be small. Work became a theater of competence where she could be valued on metrics and taste, and where her family's pettiness had no currency. But the midpoint's true twist was less professional and more intimate. One morning, after a pitch meeting, Nancy's phone buzzed with a voicemail from her mother. The voice was softer, older. "We're worried," it said. "Is this why you shut us out? Are you lonely?" It was a bait that barely disguised a plea. Nancy realized success had not silenced the ache, it had only refocused it. If family wanted her, they'd have to want her whole, not just the parts that made them proud. She sat on the edge of her couch and felt the two realities converge, the boardroom's bright fluorescent focus and the muffled domestic theater of a mother's interrogation. Both wanted something of her. Both had power. She chose to prepare the gala proposal first. Then she would decide what to do about the voice in her voicemail. Work demanded attention now, relational calculus could wait, but it would not disappear. At night she rehearsed lines and designed a centerpiece that told a city's history in flowers. In the morning she declined a series of voicemails. The world responded, bigger bookings, more requests, a confirmation that her talent opened doors. The cost was visible and immediate, the family's slow estrangement, but the payoff was tangible and growing. The twist of the middle was that victory might require sacrifice, and that sacrifice might finally give her the something she'd wanted forever, to be counted. The week before the gala presentation, Nancy's life had the sharpness of a tuned instrument. Every minute had a purpose, every supplier call felt like threading a needle. She transformed concept into tangible moments, a floral timeline that led guests through eras, lighting cues that revealed portraits, a program that folded into itself like a storybook. Kelsey built the mood boards while Sophie held the logistical map like a helmsman. Home life became a static hum. Messages from family dimmed in volume but sharpened in tone, calls of pride disguised as invitations, offers that expected submission in exchange for peace. Nancy had turned off her phone the night before the presentation and slept with the quiet of someone who'd finally learned to rest. The gala pitch arrived like an audition with consequences. The boardroom suited were polite, their curiosity edged with institutional protectiveness. Nancy spoke of the city as if introducing an old friend, its awkward patches, its grace notes, the neighborhoods stitched together by ordinary people. She presented a pathway of experiences, music that pivoted like chapters, flowers that mapped the river, a dining design that told a civic story rather than a personal romance. Her voice steadied as she wove texture into the plan. At the end, a woman on the board leaned forward and said, "You understand how to make people feel seen." A yes came 2 days later with a contract that would change the company's fiscal map. The validation was not simply public praise, it was the resource to hire more help, to move into a new office, to run with the momentum of possibility. Kelsey and Nancy celebrated with too much wine and the kind of laughter that feels like an exhale. Yet celebration didn't erase the gnaw. The family's pressure mutated. An ultimatum arrived, a call from her parents saying they would be at her office at noon. Nancy refused the impulse to answer the summons in a panic. They came anyway, uninvited, their faces tight. Her mother stepped into the new office like someone inspecting a set, eyes tracking the windows, the certificates on the wall, the evidence of success. The conversation that followed was both raw and familiar. Her mother used phrases polished for persuasion. "We're worried about you, you're being selfish, you're making things difficult." Her father added old theater, displeasure and disappointment with the practiced cadence of someone who'd never had to soften for others. They played the part of injured parties and expected an apology as a balm. Nancy kept her hands quiet on the desk. Her voice was level. She could recite every guilt trip they'd ever used in the family, the reminder of table manners, the tallying of household favors, the catalogue of incidents where she had overreacted. She answered each point with calm fact, her revenues, her staff, the awards, the people who were inviting her in. It was honest accounting, not braggadocio. "You can still be part of this family," her mother insisted. "Just apologize and we'll move forward." It was a version of control, apologize to erase the discomfort they'd caused. Nancy felt the old reflex, to smoothness, to reconciliation, rise like a tide. She steadied against it. "I'm not apologizing for protecting my dignity," she said. The words landed like a bell. There was a beat of silence like a held breath. The parents left, palms empty of the apology they'd hoped to collect. As the door clicked, another sound came, the ticker of new emails. Contracts had arrived from the gala, a new client wanted a consultation. Gregory Thornton's assistant texted to request a meeting. Success and rupture existed on the same table. That night Nancy sat alone in the office after everyone had left and stared at the city. The choice felt less like a cliff and more like a threshold, one that required movement, a steady passage. She imagined the Thanksgiving table empty without her and felt both the sting and the clarity. She thought of the children's table's plastic cups and knew that the problem wasn't the plastic, it was the message embedded in an otherwise beautiful room. Kelsey arrived at midnight with takeout and prosaic words about inertia. "You know they'll try again," she said. "They'll ring every bell." Nancy nodded. She imagined the future, a life filled with work, with people who saw her, and with a family that might soften only after long distance taught them the ache of absence. She felt a sudden wave of compassion for them, not because they'd changed, but because they were small in a way she had once inhabited. The pressure to reconcile pushed from both sides, the public success that demanded time and humility, and the private need to be whole. A message blinked on her phone, an invitation to give a small talk about her process at a design collective. She smiled, a private, fierce curve, and felt the momentum of a decision. She would not apologize for being who she was. She would accept both the price and the prize. Thanksgiving morning arrived in low, honest light, and the city smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves. The plan was simple: brunch with friends who chose to be family that day, and the plan felt like a sovereign act. Kelsey's apartment filled with clinking plates, laughter, the kind of easy affection that didn't tally wounds. For the first time since the children's table, Nancy felt present without the itch of explanation. Midway through gravy and gratitude, her phone buzzed. Her mother's name appeared like a small storm. Nancy ignored it. Her hand stilled over a coffee cup, a decision in micro, and she allowed herself to be rooted in the room she'd chosen. Later, curiosity and caution drew her to the message thread. Her mother had called a meeting of mutual acquaintances, played the victim, and spun a story of abandonment. Nancy read the string of texts where relatives whispered and wondered, where sympathy had been rerouted to produce scandal. It was a social couched theater of the kind she knew well. She felt the familiar anger, then a steadier flame, refusal to be a performative object in their narrative. At noon, someone from her office called. A VIP client wanted to meet to discuss a gala extension. Gregory Thornton's assistant had requested another pitch. The timing would have been comical if it weren't so decisive. Nancy stood and let the room applaud the small business call that announced itself like a trumpeter. It was the universe asking her where she wanted to place her attention. She called her mother back anyway, not to apologize, but to set a boundary with surgical clarity. The conversation turned quickly from pleading to playing of terms. Her mother said, "We can move past it if you apologize." Nancy's throat constricted with the memory of all the apologies that had returned nothing but the same pattern. She chose a different ending. "I will not apologize for protecting my dignity," she said quietly. "If you can be in my life without making me prove myself, we can have a relationship. If not, I accept time apart." Silence thundered on the line. The implied nuclear option, banishment, withdrawal, hung unsaid. For a moment Nancy felt the old, tiny girl in her chest who wanted to run back and smooth things with a word. Then she felt the woman built of contract deadlines, vendor calls at 2 a.m., the brides who'd cried at the altar because Nancy had created a room that let them be fully themselves. She remembered the plastic cups and the way they'd cut at her. The decision rippled outward. Her parents' voice rose, bargaining shifted into threats. "You wouldn't throw away family over stubbornness, would you?" Nancy listened, then placed the receiver down like a book completed. She did not go. She did not apologize. The line's static felt like a release. Immediately, consequences arrived like flurries. Her father sent a message about being excluded from family matters. Her siblings issued guilt spun as concern. The house hummed with the small social theater of shame. Nancy watched the messages without responding, like watching rain on glass. At work, more doors opened. Gregory Thornton called to confirm a major corporate gala and mentioned other boards asking for her pitch. The market responded to competence in real time. But success wasn't the bribe she'd suspected, it was an honest ledger of what she could build independent of approval. It was also, she realized, a scaffold for living unseen without consent. The emotional apex was not a dramatic reconciliation or a cinematic public humiliation in return. It was quieter, a room full of people she'd chosen, toasts said for the quality of her craft, a bride who wept into her palm, a friend who squeezed her hand with meaning. The applause wasn't the same as parental approval, but it was given freely, unconditioned by the need for her to shrink. That night, alone in her office after the last guest had left the gala room bathed in the cooling glow of a job well done, she let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. The cost, distance from parents, empty chairs at holidays, was real and sharp. The gain, a sense of sovereign self, a life arranged on her terms, was also undeniable. She allowed herself to grieve and to celebrate in the same breath. A message arrived from Aunt Helen, "You have courage. I'm proud." It landed like balm. Nancy sat at her desk and noticed how steady her hands were now. She had not chosen vindictiveness, she had chosen not to diminish herself to make others comfortable. That, in the end, was the most radical thing she'd done. Time settled into a new pattern. Calls from her parents thinned, then came in fits of nostalgia and tentative civility. Her siblings texted at odd hours. Bethany returned after a period of strain and apologized for being complicit in silence. Courtney called to say she'd finally told Daniel she needed space. Life reshaped to hold consequences and openings, but it did not seek neat closure. Nancy moved her company into larger offices with a view of the river, not as proof but as room to breathe. She hired 2 staff members she trusted, built systems that let her step back when necessary, and kept a small shrine on a shelf, a faded photo of her with a graduation tassel, a business card with a notation in her own handwriting. It reminded her of continuity, the thread from the girl who worked 2 jobs to the woman who negotiated gala budgets. Friends became rituals of repair, low-key brunches, a yearly trip with Kelsey, long workdays that ended with takeout and playlists whose lyrics made sense. Nancy allowed herself small joys, late mornings, a plant that refused to die, a note from a client that detailed how the event had changed their community. They were not replacements for family, but they were chosen kin, steady and present. Her mother called once with a voice that sounded older than the years that passed. "We saw the photos," she said. "The mansion. The flowers. You did very well." It was not an apology but a thin acknowledgement. Nancy responded with something softer than triumph, "Thank you." No victory dance. No bitterness. Just a measured answer softening the edges of a wound that might never fully heal. There were moments, small, unadvertised, where Nancy felt a hollow. Holidays arrived and she noticed the empty seat at the table she'd once been forced into, thought about the children's cups, the way light had refracted off crystal. Grief slid through those spaces and she let it. Grief was a necessary price for keeping her integrity. A year later, at a spring gala she'd produced, Nancy stood at the back of the room watching people move through her design like characters in a story she'd written. A woman paused, reached for her, and said, "I watched how you handled the Thornton event. I want you to plan my charity gala." When Nancy accepted, she felt something like home settle, not the familial insistence of belonging, but the groundedness of being seen for craft and care. Her parents attended a wedding where Nancy's name was on a program. They sat in the audience. They did not seek her out afterwards. They watched someone else's ceremony and left. She did not chase them. A small part of her wondered about the possibility of future rapprochement. A larger part knew boundaries would only hold if both sides were willing to change. They had not yet shown they would. Sometimes, late at night, Nancy would scroll back through old photos and find a younger face, eager, raw, hopeful, and she'd smile. That younger woman had taken a path that made others nervous. She had paid a price for it, and she had gained a life that fit her. The cost was not invisible, it had shape and sound. But it also had meaning. At the end of the day, she preferred the quiet moments, a client's grateful message, a friend's knock at the door, the sound of rain on the window. She had learned the most difficult lesson of adulthood, that love is not always reciprocal, that sometimes the bravest act is refusing to shrink, and that dignity could be chosen again and again. Her last note in the company journal that spring read, simply, "I built this with my hands. I will not apologize for it." It was not vindictive. It was a relic of a decision made in a corner of a restaurant, a single evening that had revealed the fault lines. She had stepped across them, not to sever, but to carve a life that fit. Sometimes the most eloquent revenge is a life well lived, not to spite, but to be true.